Hi, this is Veer, and I'm making a little guide on playing the Silent on Slay the Spire, just hopefully to show you how I play and, I don't know, maybe help you get through Ascension 1, we'll see. So usually I find that the Silent has kind of two archetypes I like to go for while I'm turtling. Either I try to deal most of my damage via poison or via infinite Shivs, and which one I choose is usually dictated by what I receive early on. Generally I try to pick the reward that removes cards from my deck, and when I'm removing cards from my deck, I always start by trying to get rid of all the strikes. I don't want to rely on them for damage output, because we'll again either be using Shivs or poison. And then the second thing I have to do is pick my track. So for the first act, the elites are relatively easy to deal with and the rewards are worth it. I generally try to find a route that gives me the most elites, then campfires, then question marks, and which has a merchant as far back as I can find. Because usually by the end of the run I'll have enough gold to buy something worthwhile, whereas encountering a merchant early on isn't usually worth it. So just double checking my route, and now that I've found it, I'm going to start. And so very early on, basically, my number one way of thinking about this is that health in this game is a resource. What I'm trying to do is minimize the amount of health damage I get, which means that when I come across campfires, I can use them to upgrade my cards instead of resting to heal, which I usually view as a bit of a waste of campfire considering how rare they are. And so when I'm in a fight, my number one priority is to take as little damage as possible, even if this means that it'll take me longer to get through the fight. Especially as I build up my deck, hopefully I'll be doing a lot of damage over time, and it's what makes the Silent relatively reliable, because the Silent is so focused on dexterity and defense that you can generally get through most regular fights losing very little HP or no HP at all. As for the cards that I'm picking up, I usually try to go for block cards over attack cards first. Something like Backflip, which is a straight upgrade over defense. With this first event, I decided to upgrade a card instead of removing a card because my starting bonus was already to remove a card, so I figured I'll upgrade Neutralize. Now Neutralize is a really good one to upgrade just because it's free. The extra little damage makes it quite helpful in case you just need to finish something off. But what's really good about it is the 2-turn weak status effect. This means that you don't have to use it in reaction anymore, you can kind of use it to set up if you know that an enemy is going to attack next turn. Which hopefully means you can spend less energy on generating block and therefore actually do a little bit more damage to them. So with these slimes, I'm currently calculating what is the bare minimum amount of block I need to generate in order to get through this fight unscathed and continue dealing damage. And that's really going to become a common theme of this entire playthrough and why it takes me 33 minutes to get through Act 1. Backflip here is really useful. Even with such a small deck, it just raises my chances of getting neutralized, which is a free 4 damage, or just getting another strike, getting what I want. So this card reward is actually quite hard to choose. I was up between Dagger Throw and Tools of the Trade, and I end up going with Tools of the Trade because the ability to draw one and discard one makes me cycle through my deck much more quickly. And the faster I cycle through my deck, the more likely it'll be that I draw the cards that I want. So it's all about really trying to keep your deck size pretty small and also trying to manipulate your draw. You want to be drawing as much as you can while having the ability to discard cards that you might not want. There are some cards later on that only have effects that trigger when you discard them, so having that draw one discard one ability is really useful. And so when I'm picking discard, I basically look at my hand and I think, okay, what can I afford to not use this turn? What will I be least likely to play this turn? And so a lot of it relies on me looking at how much damage the creature is going to do and trying to figure out the sort of combination of cards I need to play in response to that. This was also a really difficult choice. At this point, I pick Cloak and Dagger, and that pretty much locks me into doing a Shiv-based deck. I try not to combine Shivs with Poison because they work a little differently, and again, I'm trying to keep my deck as lean as possible, so if I'm going for a Shiv heavy deck, you know, I'm going to be prioritizing cards like Infinite Blades, Cloak and Dagger, and most importantly, Accuracy, which I think you have to unlock. And so the core of this deck is going to be built around finding those Accuracy and Accuracy Plus cards, playing them early, then using more draw cards in order to make it more likely that those Shiv generating cards will come up, while at the same time stacking my deck with a lot of block generating cards to keep myself alive while I slowly whittle down enemies with all of the Shiv cards I'm going to generate. It's really important because later on there are a lot of enemies with the Thorns power, which means that every time I attack I'm going to take damage, and so I need to generate enough block to kind of counteract that before I hit them. I have lost several runs by making multiple attacks on a creature that has Thorns and forgetting it's going to hit me for a lot of damage. The first level the fights are pretty easy, but that's part of why I try to beeline for the elites. They're relatively easy to deal with. I feel all of them are basically a DPS race. Now, I lucked out with this first elite. The sentries I find are probably the easiest elite enemy in Act 1. So they always alternate. The first and third always start with Daze, and the middle always starts with 8 attack. So my priority is to kill either the first or the last one. That way, I'll only be dealing with 8 damage at any given turn instead of alternating between 8 and 16. These dazed cards are really irritating. If you're playing a deck with, say, the Ironclad that has a lot of special powers that trigger when cards exhaust, having a lot of dazed cards in your deck becomes a real benefit. But for the Silent, all it's doing is clogging up our deck and make it less likely that we'll draw things that we need. However, they're easy enough to get rid of, so I'm not super worried. I'm just going to focus entirely on whittling down that first one. I'm always trying to play cards like Backflip or basically any card that has an effect that lets me draw more cards so that I get more information, and I always try to play those at the beginning of my turn. There's no point in playing a card that will make you draw more if you're only on 1 energy or none by the end of it, even if you're hoping for a 0 energy cost card. It's just not worth it. If you were smarter than me, you could probably check the draw pile and see what you're likely to pick up. Another quirk of this particular fight is that, when possible, I'm trying to keep dazed cards in my hand. I'm trying not to discard them because I have the Ethereal trait, which means that they'll exhaust themselves if they're in my hand at the end of my turn. Ideally, I want to kind of keep up on top of the rate at which they're being generated, right? So that's the other benefit to targeting the first or the last one. It means that you'll only ever be generating 2 dazed cards per turn. So if you can ensure that there are at least 2 dazed cards in your hand at the end of your turn, you'll keep on top of it. Your deck won't get clogged up with dazed cards, and so the likelihood of you drawing useful cards goes up, or at least stays the same, and that's really what you want. and that was a nice and easy elite enemy kill. Now, this card reward, I almost didn't pick anything, but Piercing Wail is a really useful debuff. That 6 strength debuff, especially on multiple enemies, can be really powerful. But again, the basic strategy is the priority is to generate enough block to mitigate all damage coming in that turn, and then I can think about attacking. The first few turns are basically setup turns, where if I have powers, I'll try to play powers, because I want to get those in effect as soon as possible so I can start benefiting from them earlier. And hopefully basically start ramping up my damage to the point where I'm outpacing the enemy. This is doubly important for any enemy such as a cultist that gains strength per turn, because if you can't keep up, or if you can't sort of out damage them like you would with an ironclad deck, the chances of you winning, or at least getting through without losing way too much HP, starts to go down. So for this one I picked Deflect. Deflect is just a quick and easy early game source of block. It's really only useful early on when enemies aren't hitting you for that much, because later on 4 block just is not going to cut it. While picking a card to upgrade, this one was pretty tough. I ultimately went with Backflip. But basically what I was wondering was, is it more important to have more shivs and therefore more damage? Or is it more important for me to gain more block early on? The other idea I had was to upgrade Tools of the Trade, because Tools of the Trade Plus is a 0 energy cost card, which is also pretty useful. But ultimately I went with Backflip because gaining more block is my #1 priority pretty much. And because I only have that 1 power card, I'm not super strapped for energy at this point. So time will tell if I made the right choice. As of the time of recording, I haven't played through Act 2 yet, so we'll see how this run goes. So again, Survivor is actually a really good card. Initially I thought it wasn't because of the discard condition it has on it, but honestly, 2 things. #1, it can be used to discard, for example, status effects or curses that give you nasty debuffs at the end of your turn. And if you play it as, if it's the only hand in your card when you play it, you obviously have no cards to discard, so it's just 8 block. Even if you can't swing it, there tends to be either a regular strike or defend in your deck that you either couldn't play anyway, or just, in the case of a regular unupgraded defend card, isn't as good as Survivor anyways. So there's no real point in playing it. So for example, on this turn, I want to play Tools of the Trade, of course, but my priority, again, is in generating enough block. So I would rather get that 13 block and do no damage that turn, because it's still pretty early on. Fungal growth hasn't really gone beyond my ability to deal with how much damage it's doing, that I can pretty safely ignore or put off doing more damage for later turns. So the card choice for this one was an absolute no-brainer. Infinite Blades, more shivs, that's what we want. Oh, Blade Dance, I'm sorry. I'm focusing on the Acid Slime because that's going to clog up my deck with slime cards, whereas the Jawworm can really only threaten me by getting big and strong, but since I have so many block cards, as well as that 2-turn weak effect coming from the Neutralize card that I upgraded, it's not as big of an annoyance. Plus the Acid Slime's easier to kill, so I'm gonna do that first. That is the other problem with a Turtling deck. You kind of have to make sure you don't get bored to death, which has happened to me more than once. Where you just get really bored and impatient and you start playing sloppy. start taking more health damage than you should, and it all kind of adds up. It's just kind of boring as I sit there doing a lot of mental calculations going, okay, how much damage am I going to do this turn? How many cards do I have to play? And so on. It doesn't make for the world's most thrilling viewing, I understand. Now I know at this point I could kill it outright with the potion, but I also tend to be really stingy with my potions and try to save them up for the boss. I was wondering, is spending that 1 energy on that worth it over potentially blocking, over generating more Shivs? Especially since I know in Act 3 there's a lot of creatures that can just outright negate vulnerable effects, and I decide to skip it. I would, again, much rather keep my deck leaner. The accuracy was a no-brainer. On the other hand, I was extremely upset at myself because I could have bought a Shuriken instead, which the Shuriken and the Kunai work extremely well in a Shiv deck because ideally you'll be making multiple strikes per turn, which means that you'll be generating attack, strength, and dexterity, which in turn means that you're going to be more and more effective. Accuracy plus, is such an important part of making this deck work because the Shivs that did 4 damage now do 9, and that's significantly more than a regular unupgraded strike card. And because again, this deck is all about generating Shivs, that's gonna pay off. Once again, just a lot of calculating, alright, exactly how much block do I need, because I would rather have this fight last longer than take damage. Now granted, I probably could have been a little more aggressive in this fight, because I have that pillow, which means I gain 15 extra hit points, and at 70 starting HP, that's a lot. A strength potion is more useful than the direct damage, because I'm using a Shiv build, which are affected by strength, so it would take that over the potion. And I felt, you know what, I could have upgraded a card there, but just to be on the safe side, let's rest. So, King Slime. I think he's one of the easier... I think he's probably the easiest Act 1 boss. Because this is set up, I am trying to gain the powers that I need, and if I can't find those, I will be playing cards that let me draw more. The King Slime's attack pattern is pretty simple. When he gets those question marks, the next turn he's going to do a really high damage attack. But if you can get him down to half health, it'll interrupt him and he'll spend his turn splitting into 2 enemies that have a maximum HP of whatever he's currently on when he splits. You'll see what I mean later. I'm also an idiot who forgot to drink the potions at the beginning because I could have benefited from that 2 strength earlier on when I was playing those early Shiv cards, but So like I said, he's now doing the big Slime Crush attack. So 26 damage is a lot. I'm gonna have to tank that with my face because I just didn't draw a lot of defend cards. But because I managed to do enough damage to him to get him below 70 HP, he split. Instead of attacking, he spent his turn splitting into the Spike Slime and the Acid Slime. I decide to I just arbitrarily pick which one I want to hit first. The smaller slimes also split, like the King Slime does. But you see, so the Spike Slime can, apply either Frail, which decreases the amount of block you get from cards, or Weak, which decreases the amount of attack damage you do from cards, while the Acid Slime gives you the Slimed status card, which you need to spend 1 energy to exhaust and get out of your deck. It's deeply, deeply irritating and I hate it. So I would much rather kill the Acid Slime first. And so here I'm throwing a potion to get it under 33, 34 HP, so that it splits, and thereby I won't take damage that turn. This, however, I have no chance of blocking, I just don't have the cards for it, so I may as well just outright kill one of the slimes with my 11 damage Shivs, and that's why I love this build. So naturally, I go for the one that's attacking. That way I'll take 10 damage as opposed to 17. This fight is going pretty okay for now. That Spike Slime is hitting for a worrying amount. I'm not even particularly concerned that I have the Frail debuff, because again, I just have so many block cards that I can kind of do whatever. And yep, that slime is dead. That's the end of Act 1. Now, for the card reward, it's Adrenaline. Wraith form I really don't like because it's all about, you know, long-term tanking this build. 1000 Cuts is okay, but it just does not do enough damage, even upgraded to be worth it. Whereas Adrenaline basically pays for itself, as we'll see hopefully as we head into Act 2.